So stay tuned. In the next one I will show you how to take these apart, how to clean them, and how to put them back together. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the throttle bracket. This will give us access to the diaphragms in the inner two carburetors, and then we'll remove the diaphragms from the outer two. Throttle bracket here, it's held on with four, I'm going to call them Phillips head, but you know they're not, 4 Phillips head screws. So you pull those out, and you're going to be watching me do a lot of removing screws. I almost said a lot of screwing, but you know that's not right. That doesn't sound right. I don't think my wife would appreciate that. So I'm pulling out, as I pull out these parts, I'm just going to set them here in a yogurt cup, and that'll kind of keep them from getting lost. Okay, so now that we have that throttle bracket off, let's go ahead and remove these screws and get one of these carb tops off. I like to remove the diaphragms first because they are fragile, and if I get them out of the way, then I don't have to worry about damaging them with fuel or during any of the other disassembly. So once we get those screws off, we can take the carb top off. There's a spring beneath, so you get the carb top followed by a spring, and then the diaphragm. And this thing is usually stuck down depending on how long it's been since your carbs have been apart, or how sticky and stinky the fuel is inside. The best way to get them is to put your finger in and just push up on the slide, and that will release the diaphragm from the carb body, and then you just kind of wiggle it out. You can see mine, it's covered in a sticky green fuel, so that's the reason we're doing this. Pull them out, and I like to keep carburetor stuff separate so that all the parts that come out of this carburetor will go into this bowl. The ones from this one will go into a separate cup, etc. That way I get all the carb parts for one carb back into the same carb when I'm done. Removing the outer carb diaphragm is exactly the same. Take out the 4 screws, lift the top off, pull out the spring, and then lift up on the diaphragm to remove it. In this case, you know, I'm going to show you this one, and then I'll pull out the other 4, so you don't have to. So it won't make this video any longer than it really has to be. And one thing you'll notice as you do this is if your carbs are dirty like mine, or if they've been sitting a while, they will have that stale stink, and these most certainly do. Actually, if you leave my workshop and you come back, the whole thing smells like it. So just as with the other one, you've got your carb top, your spring, and then your diaphragm here. And to get it out, you just lift up on the slide. You can see this one came out a little bit different. It lifted up all the way. Just gently work that diaphragm out of the channel in the carb body. You want to be really careful not to damage it if it's, you know, it can crack here because of the age, or because of age, as well as this can get brittle over time. So you always want to be really careful with these. So I've got the first 2 diaphragms removed. I'm working on the 3rd one here. And unlike the first 2, this one's in there pretty sticky. It requires quite a bit of force to get it to lift up. If you run into that, or if yours are seized in there, the best way to get them out is actually to use hot water. What I'll do is I'll heat some up in the microwave, and I'll pour it down in so it gets around and heats up the slide a bit, and that'll usually break them free so you can get them out. So I've removed all 4 carb top springs and diaphragms. Yours should hopefully look something like this. Now that that's done, I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to start removing the float bowls. These are going to all be the same, and just like with the top, we have to start by removing the bracket in the middle. This bracket is what controls your throttle stop and is used to set your idle speed. Start by removing the idle speed adjustment screw. Set it aside, and then go after the 3 mounting screws which hold the bracket to the carburetor bodies. Note here that that bracket goes on top of the float bowls. Also note that the screws that go into this bracket, they look the same as the other ones, but they're a little bit longer, and they also have a little lock washer on them. It's important, not important now, but you'll need to know that later. All right, once you have that bracket off, let's go ahead and start. We'll pick one. We'll start in this middle one. Hold down on the float bowl and remove the remaining 3 screws. Now, depending on how well your carburetor is drained, there may or may not be fuel in here. So remove it carefully and expect a small bit of fuel to leak out, and be prepared with a rag. Okay, so once those are out, grab a hold of it and just wiggle it loose. It should come free pretty easily. There's a O-ring that seals the bowl to the body of the carburetor. Sometimes those get hard or they stick. Mine have been replaced probably 3 or 4 years ago, but they are starting to get stiff again. So take those off, and now you've got the inside of your carburetor. This is the float bowl, and you can see this one has had fuel sit in it and sort of etch into the bowl a little bit. The last time I cleaned these, this was nice and clean. So this is the result of me, not winterizing my bike like I should. Alright, so now you've got the float bowl off. I'm going to rotate the carburetors around so you can get a better idea, or you can hopefully see this better. Inside you've got the float. This is what controls the fuel level inside the bowl. You've got your main jet, your pilot jet, which is the smaller one down there, and then this one is your enrichment circuit. So when you start the bike and you pull out the choke, it's not really a choke, but when you pull out the choke, this allows a small bit of fuel to go in through that orifice and enrich in the mixture. So first thing we're going to do is remove this, remove the float, get it out of the way. It's held in place with a little pivot pin, and you can usually push that in, grab a hold of the pin and remove it. And as I say this, I now recall you have to work your way from the outside in or you can't get this out. So I'm going to switch over and we're going to work on this. I've gone ahead now and removed the float bowl for this carburetor. And the reason being that with the bowl in place, there's not enough room to get the pin out for the float. So we're going to work our way on this one, and then we'll come back and do this one, and then, yeah. So start to get the float out, and just push that pin out. And you can see it stick out there. And I'm going to grab it with a pair of pliers. You may or may not need to, but with these rubber gloves on, I don't have a lot of dexterity. So you pull that pin out, and you notice the float has come loose. If you lift it up, it will come out, but you'll also have noticed that the needle fell down inside. So this is the needle valve. I guess that's what we call it. That's what I call it. It's what controls fuel flow into the carburetor. So make sure you get that when you pull out the float. So now that the float's done, I think we'll probably start with the main jet. This looks like you could put a standard screwdriver in there and take it loose, and people do. I used to do it that way, but you end up buggering it up because that brass is really soft. So what I do now is I use a butter knife and I insert it, kind of non-intuitively into the main jet, and I use that as a tool to get the to remove the jet instead of trying to do so with a screwdriver and chew it up. And I am putting, as I remove these parts, I'm just putting everything into the float bowl that goes in. So we've got the main jet out. Now we can go ahead and remove the pilot jet. Unlike the main, you can't get that with a butter knife, so I use just a small standard screwdriver. And very carefully pop that out. We've removed the main jet, we've removed the pilot jet. So now I'm going to remove this jet holder, 8mm wrench. Make sure that what you use there fits really well, because these like to round off. And I like to grab it on the bottom boss and not on the top. It just gives me a little bit more leverage. Get it loose and then you can back it out. And this, it just threads in and it seals to the carb body with a copper washer. So you'll see that in a minute. Alright. So there's that copper washer I mentioned. So it goes copper washer first and then the jet holder. And you can't really see it. I don't know if I can show. I'll show it a bit, but there's an O-ring that fits in here that seals between the main jet and the emulsion tube. So now that we have the float and the jets out of the way, let's go ahead and remove the needle holder. It's held in place. I've inserted from the top side, I don't know if you can see in there, it pushed in down and it's held in place with a nut and a washer. Using a 6mm, you can remove that nut and hold your finger on the inside, because that once you take this nut loose, that needle holder will want to fall. So remove the nut and the washer, and you should be able to just shake it on out of there. Oh, ha! Look, there it is. So that's the needle holder. So once that's out, the only thing left inside this carburetor is the seat for the float valve. I don't mess with these unless you really have to, because they tend to be stuck in there firm, and really the only way to get them out is to try and grasp them with a pair of pliers, and invariably you chew them up and destroy them. So don't mess with them unless you've got a reason to pull that out. Don't mess with it. Alright, so following that same approach, I'm going to go ahead and remove the internals from the rest of these carburetors. Alright, so that went well. I have managed now to remove the float bowls from all 4 carburetors, the floats and the jets. The next thing we're going to do is remove the pilot screws. So the pilot screws are located on the top of the carburetors, let's see, on the engine side. So that's these here. If your carburetors have never been off your bike and been cleaned, chances are those pilot screws will be covered with brass plugs. Back when Yamaha built the bikes and put the carburetors on them, they would set the air fuel mixture and tune the carburetors using an exhaust gas analyzer. After they did that, they pressed in these brass plugs. So if you still have these brass plugs, you'll have to remove them before you can get to the pilot screws. And what I usually do is bore out that center hole just a little bit and then thread a machine screw in there, and I grab that screw and wiggle them out with a pair of vice grips. To get these out, insert a screwdriver, and you can see with this one, they're just a small slotted screwdriver. These were set to a specific value, and you know, sometimes you'll see in a manual, set them to 2.5 turns out or 1 3/4 turns or whatever. These, because you know, as I mentioned, were set with an exhaust gas analyzer. There's no predefined value you can set them to. So, you know, you couldn't just set these all to 2.5. So what you need to do is you need to run the screws in and count the number of turns, write that down, and then remove them. That way, we've got a number, we know where to put these back once the carburetor is clean. So what I'm going to do is I've got a piece of paper here, and as I pull these out, I'm going to write down what the number of turns is. I'm calling this carb 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's just start here. We'll start at number 1. Let's see. And I'm going to put a mark, just scratch it into the body, showing where that screw was originally pointed. That way I've got a reference mark. So let's see. Screwing in, half, 1, half, 2, half, 3, half, 3/4. So that one's 3 3/4. So we'll write that number down. And we'll move on and we'll do the same thing for number 2, number 3, and number 4. I've gone through and I've pulled, measured where each one of the pilot screws were set. On my carb, it was 3 3/4, 3 1/4, and then 5 1/2 and 5 1/4. Typically, you'd expect these to be between 2 and 4. So there's something going on with these carburetors that I'll have to figure out. But now I know where to set these screws, so I know how many turns once we put them back in to set them at. So let's go ahead, we'll start on number 1, we'll take these out. And when they come out, there's going to be some extra parts you want to keep an eye out for. So you've got the screw and the spring. And then stuck down inside here, there's also going to be a washer, a little flat washer and a seal. Let's see if I can get it to fall out. So that worked. Here's the little tiny washer. And do your absolute best not to lose these. I'll put the measurements in the description in case you do. You can get them, from like McMaster Car. But in this case, there's still a tiny little O-ring stuck down in there. And the way I get those out is I use, like a wood deck screw. So this one, it's just one I had laying around. Put it in through, into the bore and just lightly twist it, and it will pick up that, that little O-ring. We'll replace these when we put the carb back together. You can see, well, you might be able to see they get pretty squished. So next thing we're going to do is remove the brackets and separate each carburetor from the bank. I'm going to get rid of this piece of paper, we don't need that. Don't lose it. So the first thing that really needs to come off before you can pull these apart is the enrichment circuit. The enrichment plunger is held in place, if you can see it, with a little snap ring. So we'll have to take that out, and then that will let us pull this assembly out, and then we can pull the screws and remove the brackets. That little C-clip that's down in there can sometimes be a bit of a bear to get out, and it loves to just go bzz past your ear and end up somewhere in the workshop. So be careful when removing it. I usually just push it off with a flat blade screwdriver. Kind of hold it with one finger and try and work it off with the other. So work that off until it comes free, and that will release the plunger from the enrichment mechanism, and then you just pull it out. And so you'll get your plunger or your handle, and then you've got sort of the mechanism that creates the detents. And last, you've got now each one of the individual levers that pulls the enrichment for each carburetor. So we can get that out, but it's much easier to get out after you remove the brackets. The first one we're going to go for is the main enrichment bracket. Okay, to get the enrichment bracket off, it's only held on with these 2 screws. Let's remove those. One thing to note is that the screws that hold the enrichment bracket on are very similar to the screws that hold the other brackets. The only difference here is that these are a little bit longer to account for the thickness. So get these out. Once this is out, this bracket will come off. Something to keep an eye out for, there is a little nylon bushing that sits in the end here. Just make sure that doesn't fall out. Now the next thing we want to do is actually remove the enrichment, this shaft that pulls all the enrichment knobs at the same time. It's just held on with 4 set screws. So remove those set screws, or not remove them, just loosen them. And once that's done, you should be able to pull out the shaft. Okay, and these are different, so kind of keep track of them. When you pull these enrichment brackets off, note that this one, the one that goes in number 1 carb, is different than the other 3. It includes the little bracket that holds the enrichment knob. So once you have all those loose, you can pull the shaft out and just kind of wiggle it, and it'll work its way out. Set that aside, and then kind of tip your carbs over and shake those little brackets loose. Now that the enrichment assembly is removed, we can actually take the carb bodies apart. Pretty much remove the screws that hold each bracket, and then I'll show you how to get them apart. So let's go ahead and we'll remove the engine side brackets first. And these screws are all the same, so you don't have to worry too much about keeping them in, putting them back where they go. And I'm just going to set these here. Okay. Told you there'd be a lot of watching me undo screws. But it's all part of the process, right? Okay, I've about got this bracket off. I think that's everything. Yep, so that's everything holding the carbs together. Now we'll go ahead and actually separate them. When you pull these apart, there's really only two things you want to watch out for. One, you want to be careful with these seals that connect the fuel rail. They can get brittle, they're special seals, and they're difficult to get. So be careful with those, kind of pull it apart straight. And then the other are the synchronization screws and springs. So the screw itself holds these springs in place, but the spring on the bottom is just held in there with friction, and it can shoot off across the shop. So be careful when you pull these apart, but otherwise just grasp the carb and wiggle it free, and it should come apart. Note mine's got the spring and the seal in place. So I'm going to do the same thing for all 4 carburetors. Okay, and then go ahead and pull out the fuel rail O-rings. These are like a little cup O-ring, cup seal that fits over top of a brass tube, and we'll get to that more when we clean these out. There's nothing special about them as to how they go together, so you don't have to worry about keeping them in any particular order. Come on, give it up. Alright. Also, go ahead and pull off the vents for the float bowls. And then the last thing we've got to do to these carburetors before they are what we're going to call completely disassembled is actually remove the enrichment plungers. These require a 12mm socket, but because space is tight between them and the carb body, you won't be able to get a socket in there. So what I did years ago is I took a 12mm deep well and I ground it down to where it had enough clearance to fit in here. So the only real advice when pulling these out is that they're made out of brass and they're soft. So be careful not to bugger them up too much. Okay, let's see if this will thread out. Okay, so you've got a little nut, the spring, and then the plunger itself. And that's all that you should expect to get out of this. So go ahead and do the same thing for the other 3 carburetors. Now that the enrichment plungers have been removed, these carburetors are ready for cleaning. Alright, so I know I told you we were going to do this in 2 videos. I'd originally thought we were going to do it in 1 video, but getting the carbs off the bike, it took longer than I expected. That video was longer than I wanted. And this video is pushing 20 minutes, so we're gonna have to actually stretch this thing out. So in this video, we got the carbs ready to clean, and in the next one, we're gonna actually have to do the cleaning. So I expect we're gonna have the remove the carbs from the bike video, this video, which is the strip the carbs down, and then I expect we'll need to do a carb cleaning video, a reassembly video, and then probably a put them on the bike video. So I thought this would be a single thing, then I thought it was a two-part series, and now it looks like it's a multiple part series. So anyway, that's the end of this one. Stay tuned for the next. As soon as I get that done, I will post it for you all to enjoy. Thanks for watching.